Hello and welcome to GryphonArt. Today I'm going to be returning to my trusted A5 milk carton template in order to show you how to create this hexagonal gift box. Now, as always, I do like to show you the relationship between the original milk carton and the box that we're making today. So this is the milk carton that you end up with if you were to use that A5 milk carton template in the conventional way, and it's a 2-inch square box with a main body height of 2 3/4 inches. And I'm hoping that you can see that these boxes have both got the same height because we are using the same score lines, and these end panels are exactly the same, so it doesn't really matter which way I put this milk carton or on which panel. This panel is very common to this box. What you're actually gaining with this hexagonal box is a much larger volume. So let's get started. Clear that out of the way for the moment. Now, as you might expect with a box that's based on the A5 milk carton template, we would perhaps anticipate that we start with an A5 piece of card. Now, the only thing is that we know that our A5 milk carton is square, has 4 sides, and we also know that a hexagon has 6 sides. So what we're going to actually be doing is reducing that A5 card. So instead of starting with a scoring point at the 2-inch mark, we're going to trim off at that point. So we're reducing the width of this card in landscape mode by 2 inches before we start. So that's the first step. So we can start by scoring in the same way as we would for our A5 milk carton. So we're going to score at 2 inches, at 4 inches, and at 6 inches. We can't go to 8 because, you know, we're missing that section. So at this point, we turn our card anti-clockwise and we score at 3/8 of an inch, 1 7/8 of an inch, and at 4 5/8 of an inch. At that point, we can turn our card clockwise, so back to where we were. And ordinarily with the A5 milk carton, we'd be scoring this little line here, the one at the 1-inch mark, just down to this score line, this 3/8 of an inch score line that we made previously. And we would do that ordinarily for the A5 milk carton at 1 inches and also at 5 inches. And we're still doing that, but additionally, we're also going to do it at 3 inches. So we've repeated that for every single panel now has the center point marked in that very first top section. Now, having done that, you do want to repeat that process with a second piece of card, so exactly the same, and I've already done that here. And at that point, we finished with our scoring board, so we can get rid of it. Now, the next thing that we need to do is to put in our little triangular or diagonal score lines as we would for our standard milk carton. So let's get started with that. Now, this is simply, if you've done all your scoring with a self-heal mat, I can actually see where my score lines are at this stage because of using a scoring board. That won't be the case if you've been using your self-heal mat. So don't worry, just fold and crease all your lines at this point, and then they'll become visible for you. So all I'm going to be doing is starting at that point where I've got that little tiny mark that I made at that sort of mid 1-inch point, and going to the outside corner of this first rectangular shape. And if in any doubt, just have a look at the A5 milk carton template, and you can actually download that from my website at gryphonart.co.uk, and I will definitely put a link to that in the description area for you so that will make life easier. So with our milk carton, we would score these lines in the first and third columns, but because this with the hexagonal box, we're actually going to be doing that in every single column. So I'll just do one more so you can see how that's working. So that, I'm hoping that you can see those lines. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the last set in, do the same with the other piece of card, and I'll fold and crease all the score lines at that point and come back to you then. Right, so that's most of my folds or score lines folded and creased, but just in case some of you are new to making milk cartons, I'm going to demonstrate how to do these diagonals because they can become a bit tricky further into the box. You may well find your own method, but if you're not used to them, it might just give you something to work from. So ordinarily, these end ones are reasonably straightforward. You can just encourage them by applying pressure either side of that fold. And once you can get to a point where you can fold that back and you can put it on a flat surface and apply some pressure with a bone folder or an equivalent tool, just to make sure that's well and truly creased. Now this one, again, you can apply the pressure either side, but you may need to sort of encourage these folds to flatten out across the box so that you can just get a flat edge. Once you've got a flat edge on the one edge of your card, you can then lay that down again and apply some pressure that way. So we'll just do these middle ones. So again, there is some resistance sometimes because of this card, so you might just have to hold in the direction that that fold is going, and then once that's bending over and you can get a flat surface on which to lay it on, then you're able to apply that pressure. So again, that's just the last one. You've got a flat edge again, you can lay it down and apply the pressure, and you are just creasing that line between this section here and this corner. You don't really want to extend it into the very top edge of your card. So that's how to deal with the diagonals. The other thing I wanted to say at this point, again for those of you who aren't used to making gift boxes, is that when you come to fold and crease your score lines, don't use the edges of your box unless you're absolutely certain that they are square. It's better to make sure that this fold line on one side of your card is lining up with the score line on the other, and that's the best way to give you a maximum chance of ensuring that your box is square. Right, so the next thing that we've got to do is just to trim away the excess card at the bottom corner here, which is not required. So I'm just going to take that out, and I tend on this end to just take the fold line out as well, and then I just cut into the middle of the fold line here on that end, and that bit's not needed. Now we can also do a similar thing to create the flaps that form the bottom of our box. So in this case, I'm just cutting down the center of that fold line, and you do want to try and keep this as straight as possible, particularly if you're making a milk carton. Actually, it's probably not so critical with the hexagonal box, but certainly if you're making a milk carton, you need to keep these straight. So having achieved that, you need to do the same to the other piece, which I've done here. So you can see they're exactly the same. And now we need to just apply our double-sided tape for assembly. We're doing this in advance. So I've already done it to one piece, and I've applied the tape at the edges here as well. So we'll quickly just put some on this one as well. And I keep this quite close to the edge. There we are. And this is all on the inside of the box, on these flaps, which is unusual, but you know, you'll see why that is as we move forward. It's just 3 flaps there. Keep sticking to my plaster, that tape. Right, so we've now got 2 pieces of card that have been scored, folded and creased in the same way. We've got our adhesion in place ready for assembly later, and the only thing that we've got now is we want to join these 2 together so that we've actually got our 6 sides. So all we're going to do here, I'm going to remove that double-sided tape, and I'm just concerning myself, if you haven't seen any of my other tutorials, then when I join these together, I'm always just concerning myself initially with the main body of the box, so between these 2 score lines, and just trying to make sure that everything lines up in that respect. Often it can benefit to do a dry run as well, in case you haven't got things quite square. So once that's in place, you can see that this remaining section of card here falls nicely into place as well. And at that point you can flip it over and apply some pressure with a bone folder, just to make sure that's bonding nicely. Now the other thing you might want to do is just reinforce this particular fold here, because that wasn't in that section of joining cards. So just a question of reinforcing that. And we're now ready to embellish our box. Now I am certainly of the opinion that when it comes to crafts, there are very few rights and wrongs. You know, you really just need to do what you feel most comfortable with. But in my experience, I would certainly say that when you're applying a flat embellishment like this, it does seem to me that it's easier to do that when your box is in a flat form. So that's why we are going to tackle the embellishments at this point. So let's just take a closer look at those embellishments. It's actually using Tim Holtz Distress inks and this tiny little stamp set from Cardio. It's part of their Majestics range, and this particular one is called Gerbera Garden, but I will put all the details in the description area of this video for you, so you can check that out there if you're interested in reproducing this form of embellishment. So I'm going to be using these mini ink pads from Tim Holtz range, and in this particular instance I'm using Fossilized Amber, Abandoned Coral, and Aged Mahogany. And again, I'll put that information in the description area for you, so you don't need to be making a note of that right now. Now, because I'm going to be using quite small stamps, I'm also going to be using these Perspex applicators, which are also available from cardio.com. Now, I'm not really taking a random approach with these stamps, mainly because I want to be able to produce multiple boxes with a similar appearance, and I also want to retain this shape and have some consistency between the panels or couple of panels on my box. So it's this panel here really mirrors this one, and then these 2 panels are repeated here. Now, I had found it quite difficult when this pattern is complete to have a look and see what I need to be doing. So I have set myself up a series of cards to help me with this, and that's what we're going to be looking at next. Actually, before we have a look at that sequence, I do just want to show you that I did test all of the ink colours on a scrap piece of the same colour card as my box, because sometimes the colours can vary once they're going onto coloured card. And if I show you this, it's not too bad with this set actually. I'm hoping that you can see that the darker aged mahogany hasn't changed too much, and neither particularly has the fossilized amber. But this abandoned coral is a lot more pink on this white than it is. It's much more dusky on the green. So that's just a little bit of a tip. If you are considering using your inks on coloured card, it's not a problem at all, but you might just want to carry out a little bit of a test first. Okay, so moving on to my pattern aid. What I've done is I've created a series of cards, and there are 4 in the set in total, and they are the same size as 2 of these panels. So they're 2 inches, well, it's 4 inches with a central score line at the 2-inch point and 2 3/4 in height. And that carries me through the process that I need to take to mirror this embellishment. So what I'm going to do is just do one set of these 2 panels and demonstrate that, and then I'll do the rest off camera so I'm not wasting your time. So I'll put that to one side first, and we'll just set up I've already set up my large flower, which is what I need in the first case, as is indicated by this card. And in this instance, I know that I'm going to be using my aged mahogany for this size flower. So I've got that ready as well. So let's just get that there where you can see it. And I do also like to have a scrap piece of paper for my first stamp, just to make sure that my the ink has got good coverage. So sometimes with the first stamp, it doesn't always cover well. So let's just, no, that's fine. So all I need to do here is use my card as a guide. I think you can see all of that. Yeah. So there we go. So I know that I'm starting off, I've got these corner ones to do. One either side. And they don't have to be exactly in the same position, it's just a rough guide really. Then I've got about a flower gap, and then I'm going to have another one up here. And I do know I need to leave space up here for my leaves, so if I'm in doubt, I'm more likely to put them slightly closer together. And then there's just one here. And the same again. So I'm going to go across and do the whole of that panel off camera, and I'll come back to you at that point. So that's now been completed across the whole length or width of my box, and you can hopefully see that it doesn't need to be exact. We're not trying to achieve absolute symmetry here. It's just going to, this approach is just going to give us a rough shape that we want to achieve. So the second card, you can see it's the first card and then with the second card added on. So we're taking the same approach, and this time we're doing these little flowers. And I didn't show you before, but if you haven't come across these little clear stamps before, they just stick to the perspex. So you can just position them and just apply pressure, and that's how it works. So in this case, we're going to be using abandoned coral for these little flowers. So once again, we'll just set that up. I'll do one panel section on camera for you, and then I'll do the rest off camera so you can see how it's building. So quick test. Yeah, I'm happy with that. So I'm just going to basically copy this here, so I can see there's one going to be here. Okay, so that's our second set of panels, and I'll come back to you as soon as I've completed the whole run. Right, so if I just bring that up to the camera, you can see that we're gradually building that pattern. And we're now going to be on to our third card set, which is including all our leaves. And in this case, we're going to be using the Tim Holtz Fossilized Amber for these. So I'll set that up. Now we've already got our leaf on our little bit of perspex. And again, I just want to do a dummy run, make sure everything's okay. Yep. So we're just following that pattern again. And you can angle them if you've got less room. Just look at the space that you've got and fill it really with the leaf. You just need to be mindful of which way the leaf's travelling, because it does alter direction. Okay, so that's our next set of stamps. So again, I'm going to do the rest off camera and come back to that point. So I'm hoping that you can see we're gradually getting there now, building our pattern up. And I have got a third card, and this is really just to enable me to see the colour scheme and to remind me not to forget my little B at the end. So I'll set that there, although it's not really that necessary. It's fairly obvious where we're going to be placing our flower centres, and that's this tiny little stamp here. And we're going to be returning to our abandoned coral for that particular purpose. So I'll pop that again where you can see it. Just do a dummy run. Fine. So we're just placing them in the centres of each flower. And what I'm actually doing is getting quite low so I can see where this is being positioned. Okay, now I am going to continue to do that, but I may as well just put the bees on at this point because it's not going to take long, and I'm going to use this same little tiny applicator because I find it easier for placing. And in this case I'm going to be using my Ranger Archival ink in the jet black because I find that works well. So if I can get the lid off. Right, so I'll set that again where you can see it. And I will do a dummy run, as always. That's probably okay. So if we have a look at this, he's just creating part of that curve line with his wings. So that's what we're doing on either side. You can see. Just make sure he's round the right way. And again, it doesn't have to be exact. Okay, so that's our panels finished. So I'm going to go on and do all the remaining flower centers and put my bee on as well, and then I'll come back to you when I've finished. Okay, so that's now our embellishment finished. All our panels are ready to go. So we can now turn our attention to assembling our box. Now this particular box is closed with a ribbon which is threaded through the top of our box. Through a series of little holes, and so the next thing we need to do is create those holes. So I do find that I need to be quite focused for this, because otherwise I have found myself in a position where I've got holes all over the place where they shouldn't be. So what I'm going to do is just give you an idea of what you're looking out for. You're concerned with each panel of card where there is this point. So at that point, you're going to fold the card so that these edges at the top line up. And you've got this pointed section here. And as long as you've got that and not that, where the card naturally lays very flat, your card needs to be feeling a little bit awkward, and then that actually means you're doing it right. So point of that triangle there. Now I'm using a 1/8 of an inch hole punch for this, and if you've got one of these punches, this is how I line it up in order to create those holes. I use this section of metal here and make sure that I line that up so just a little bit of that fold is visible. Hoping that you can see that all right. And then you can see where your punch is going to be placed in that card. So you want to make sure, if possible, that it is central. Well, let's just punch one and then I'll show you. So I line it all up, and when I'm happy, because you're going through several pieces of card. In actual fact, I probably should have gone lower than I've gone now, because it's best to err on the side of being closer into this first score line than to be at the top side of your box, because your ribbon's pulling through that. So you know, it's the more card there is on this side of the hole, the better in that respect. But let's have another go. So again, you're folding the card so that this top edge is lining up nicely. It feels a bit awkward. You've got, when you look at this end, you've got this triangle and you're at that point. So again, we're lining up the punch so that we can see a little bit of card. I'm going to try and get a bit further in this time. There is some resistance to you pushing down because the triangle is trying to stop you. So I'm just going to... Yes, that's better. You see, it's a little further down, so that's going to be less at risk of the ribbon pulling through there. So that's how you want to try and get it. So I'll do one more and then I'll do the rest off camera. So folding that card, lining up those edges, checking to see that you've got this triangular shape and you're at the point, and then lining up the punch. And there we go. There we are. So that way you certainly get an equal distance between this fold line and these holes. So I'll do the rest off camera and come back to you at that point. So that's all our holes now cut into the top section of our box, ready for the ribbon. So the next thing that we can do is join the sides of our box and assemble the base. And I've put a piece of double-sided tape down the side there to start with. So I like to do a dry run and just check everything's lining up all right. That being the case, I can remove the backing tape from my double-sided tape, and again concern myself with the main body of the box. So that's just this section here. You can see this is loose. So once I'm sure that that's all lining up and nicely in place, I can apply the pressure, and then this section normally just falls into place accordingly. So I will just apply some pressure with my bone folder just to make sure that that's nicely bonded. So the next thing that we can now do is our base, and I do always find this a little bit tricky if I was honest. Now unfortunately we can't just put these flaps down, because in order to keep the height of the box the same as the A5 milk carton, which is the whole point of having that series of cartons, these flaps are not deep enough to meet in the middle, and therefore we need to apply some additional card. Now for this design I opted to use a hexagon which is slightly smaller than the circumference of the box. In fact, I'll show you with this one. You can see hopefully that there's a margin around the side, and I found that was better because it's not always easy with the fold lines to get an exact equal hexagon shape. So if you went for the actual size shape hexagon, you might end up with bits sticking off the edges at some point. So it's entirely up to you, but I found that I preferred to work with a slightly smaller hexagon, and that's what I've done. Now in order to get that shape, I've used a Spellbinders Nestabilities die cutter, and this is simply hexagons. If you haven't got a hexagon, don't fret. A circle will probably work just as well. It's just a question of having something that will go on that inside. Now, it's trying to get this square, and this is the best way that I have found so far. It's not ideal, I don't think, but it's the best way I've managed to work this out to date. Now I know that this hexagon has a margin away from the edge, and I'm going to be using two of these. The first one will go on the inside so that you get a nice neat finish inside the bottom of your box. And I found it easier to then apply the flaps down over the top of it, and then it's just finished on the outside, as you'll see later with the second one. So if you can see that there, that's roughly where that needs to be positioned, because that's the margin that we've got around the edge of this hexagon. So I'm going to start there by removing the backing tape from this piece of double-sided tape that I've put on the back of the hexagon, and removing the same on one of these flaps. I can then line that up as I did just now, keeping the edge of the hexagon parallel with the fold line at the bottom of the box. And then once that's nicely in position, just applying some pressure so that I've attached it. Now at this point I find it's worth bringing in something to use for stability, because for two reasons. A, so that you can keep some shape to this so it doesn't flatten out, and ideally it needs to lift the box off the ground. If I show you here, that glass is now on the bottom, so it's longer than my box. In an ideal world, the edge of this would just sit on the bottom, but I've tried a can of baked beans and unfortunately that's too short. So I'm making the most of what I've got, so I'll leave you to do the same. So the next thing that we need to do is attach the other side of this hexagon to the opposite flap, and at the same as you do that, you need to try and make sure that you've got quite a nice equal hexagonal shape to the best of your ability. So I'm going to go ahead with this, and this is the worst part of this base. I find it can take me a long time to sort of line everything up, but here we go. So I know that these points here need to line up with these corner folds here. If I can just try and I told you I struggle with this. That seems to be okay. And what I tend to do then, just as a double check, actually I can see that that's not quite right. So I'm going to have another go at that. Because when you fold all your flaps down, you should end up with quite an equal hexagon in the middle as well. So if you've not got that, then you know that all is not well. See. Yeah, I'm happier with that. It's not perfect, but it's certainly more of a hexagonal shape in the middle there, so I shall work with that one. And I wish you better luck than I have. I do find it a nightmare, as I say. So I'm now just going to work my way around and put these down, and maybe sort of trying to still make sure it's equal. The shape in the middle looks equal and even. Well, it could be worse, I think. It could be worse. Let's have a look and see how that's going to go together. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. So the last thing that I'm going to do before we leave that there, I'll just pop that back over the top of the glass, is we're going to apply this second hexagon to the base. It strengthens the base, it neatens it all up, and generally improves things, I think. So I'm just going to, I've already applied double-sided tape. I'm just going to do my normal thing and apply some PVA glue to that as well, remove the backing, and I'll come back to you once that's stuck in place. Right, so that's our base now all in place and finished. So we can look to our ribbon closure. Now I'm using 6mm gross grain ribbon for this. You could use a thinner ribbon, 3mm or something like that if you wanted. And actually it would probably draw more easily with a thinner ribbon, but I quite like the impact of the 6mm gross grain and it works fine. The thing to bear in mind is that you need to have ribbon that will go all the way around your box with a little to spare, because when your box is fully extended, that's how much ribbon is going to disappear into that closing mechanism. So you might think when you've pulled it tight and your ribbon is tied that you've got quite a lot of spare, but that will disappear when the box is opened up. So just bear that in mind. Don't be tempted to trim back your ribbon once you've tied your bow. Otherwise you might find it disappearing out of these holes as the box gets opened. So you just want a little to spare, and that seems to work out at about 15 inches as far as I can tell. Now, if you're not going to be putting any embellishments on the end of your ribbon, you might want to just cut it a little bit longer so that you can trim it slightly back, simply because in threading the end of the ribbon through these holes, it can tend to fray a bit. So, you might want to be trimming that off if you're not putting embellishments on the end. So there's a couple of things that I do that are not necessarily right, but I'll pass them on to you anyway. We've got a join here and here, and I quite like to start my ribbon off away from those joins, so in this middle panel here, and you're starting on the left hand side hole. So if I just thread that one through, you can see clearly. And you know that there's going to be just about an inch to spare, so you can pull the ribbon quite a long way through. So it's just that left hand side hole, left hand of that triangular point. And then it's just a question of continuing to thread that in and out. So we're now from the inside of our box coming outwards in the next, and that's just in that next hole. So, and try and keep your ribbon as flat as you can on the inside. So you can see it's just gone in one space, I'm hoping you can see anyway, and out of the next. And then it's going to be repeating that process all the way around. Do another one. And then you end up with these little stitch sort of effects at the top of the triangular points. So I think that's straightforward. I'm going to go off camera to finish that off, so I'm not unnecessarily wasting your time, and I'll come back to you when I've completed that. So that's all my ribbon now threaded through, and you can see these little stitch type effects. So that's what hopefully you've got with your box. Now I just want to say, if you've got this scenario where the ends of your ribbon are not at an even point, don't worry about it. All you need to do is place I haven't explained it, in this case I've started to put the embellishment in place to save time, but actually that's about where my ribbon would be placed. So you just place the ends of your ribbon together and pull at the same time, and it will sort itself out. So at this point I'm going to start to tie, even though I haven't sorted out all my embellishments. I'm going to tie this off. So here we go. And we're going to have a look at this final embellishment on the end of the ribbon. Now for those little ribbon ends, just to add some weight, which you don't have to do, it's a matter of choice, and just a little bit of extra embellishment. I'm using these tiny little shapes, and I've got 2 of them for each ribbon end. Now these have just been die cut using another Spellbinders Nestabilities die cutter. This is label 32, and again this information will be there for you in the description area for this video. So all I've done here is I've applied some double-sided tape to the back of 2 of those shapes which have been cut and embossed, and I'm going to start by just putting a little bit of PVA on the shape as well, because I just, PVA will get into all those little edges on this shape, as well as giving it a good strong bond for time moving forward. It's got longevity about it, it's PVA glue. So once I've got to that stage, I shall remove that little bit of backing tape from my double-sided tape, and then I can line my ribbon up, just sit it on that tape in the position that I want it, and just use my bone folder to just apply a little bit of pressure and make sure that it's sticking down. So I can then lay that one down and leave it alone. So I'm going to repeat the process with the glue on this one. So we'll just make sure that's reaching all those edges. And then remove that backing tape from my double-sided tape. And all I'm going to do now is line these two shapes up. So just see where they come together evenly. And then once they're lined up, I can apply that pressure around the edges. And I've got a shape that's the same back and front, if I show you. So it's embossed on both sides. Now I am only going to be applying my little cold porcelain flowers to one side, and I have a tendency to tie the ribbon first. It's a bit crazy really, but it's only because in my head I'm thinking, well, if I tie it now, whichever way these things are laying, they'll lay the next time I come to tie the ribbon. So I'm not quite sure if that makes any sense at all, but that's what I'm sticking with for whatever reason. So I'm just trying to get a fairly nice little ribbon here. And you can fiddle with ribbons for hours if you're anything like me, but I will try and leave it alone in the interest of time. So there we are, that's almost done now. So I'm just going to apply those cold porcelain flowers to these little end pieces. And all that takes is, these are the little cold porcelain flowers. Now you could use buttons on this, you could use little brad style embellishments, that sort of thing. I use these cold porcelain flowers a lot because I can make them myself, and I can make them in all different colours, and that way they can go with lots of my cards. So if you're interested in making them yourself, there is a tutorial available, and I'll put a link to that for you again in the description area so that you can find that more readily. So just do the second one with a bit of PVA glue. Now I happily use PVA glue with the cold porcelain because I make the cold porcelain myself, and I know it contains quite a huge proportion of PVA glue, and on that basis it's fair to assume that it's going to stick well to the cold porcelain. So those, I'm just going to leave those to set off, and whilst I'm doing that, whilst we've given that chance just to bond, I'm going to show you some other colorways, because I always try and make sure you can see these boxes in a number of different colorways. So we've been using this one throughout the tutorial, so it's blue. Now I can tell you that the colors that I've used, the Tim Holtz ink colors, are this dark blue is a chipped sapphire, the pink is picked raspberry, and the leaves are in mustard seed. So that's that combination if you're interested. So that's that one. Then we've got another blue one, which is slightly different actually. If I leave this one in your sights, you can see the difference. So with this one, just double checking for you, we've got aged mahogany in these little flowers and in the flowers, large flower centers. We've got pine needles for the leaves, and then we've got spiced marmalade for the larger flowers. So that's that one, another blue, and I've just used a maroon ribbon in the top there. And finally we've got this little white, and again blue. I must have, last week I had a green theme, this week seems to be blues. So with this one we've got Mermaid Lagoon for these, which is the blue for the large flowers, Fossilized Amber centers and small flowers, and then Evergreen Bough is the other remaining leaf. So those are those three, and of course we've now got this one that we made today. So we've got 4 options there. So that essentially is the end of that tutorial. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much for taking the time to watch it.